What if some of the most powerful names in entertainment, religion, and media were connected by something far bigger than anyone imagined? Not a business deal, not a public partnership, not even a friendship, but a web of influence, secrets, allegations, and unanswered questions that continues to grow with every passing month. For years, Diddy Combs stood at the center of an empire. He wasn't just a music mogul. He was a cultural force, a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms, award shows, television networks, and celebrity circles around the world. His success story became part of modern entertainment history. But now, that story has taken a dramatic turn. As legal battles continue to unfold and public scrutiny intensifies, a new documentary connected to 50 Cent is forcing audiences to look beyond the headlines and ask a much deeper question. Was this only about one man? Or was there an entire system operating around him that nobody wanted to talk about? The documentary begins by pulling back the curtain on a world most people never see. A world where influence matters more than appearances. A world where relationships become currency. A world where access can open doors that remain closed to everyone else. And according to the filmmakers, some of the footage featured in the project has never been seen by the public before. That revelation alone sparked controversy. Questions immediately surfaced. How was the footage obtained? Who knew it existed? And perhaps most importantly, what does it reveal? The debate quickly spread across social media, news outlets, podcasts, and online communities. Some viewed the documentary as an attempt to expose uncomfortable truths. Others saw it as a calculated attack against a powerful figure already facing enormous public pressure. But regardless of where people stood, one thing became impossible to ignore. The conversation was getting bigger, much bigger, because as viewers watched, they noticed something unexpected. The documentary wasn't only talking about Diddy. It was examining the people, institutions, and networks that surrounded him. And that's where things became far more complicated. One of the most discussed names mentioned throughout these conversations is Bishop T.D. Jakes. For decades, T.D. Jakes has been one of the most influential religious leaders in America. Millions have listened to his sermons. Thousands have attended his conferences. Political leaders, celebrities, business executives, and public figures have all crossed paths with him throughout his career. His influence stretches far beyond the walls of any church. That's why recent developments involving his leadership transition immediately attracted public attention. Normally, leadership changes inside major organizations happen quietly. But when a globally recognized figure begins stepping away from a role that defined much of his public identity, people naturally start asking questions. Some see it as a normal transition. Others wonder whether timing means something more. The documentary doesn't provide a definitive answer. Instead, it explores the environment surrounding these events. And in today's world, perception often moves faster than facts. A headline appears, a rumor spreads, a clip goes viral. Within hours, millions of people are forming opinions, long before investigations finish, long before evidence is examined, long before anyone truly knows the complete story. That's one of the central themes explored throughout the documentary. The growing gap between what is known and what is believed. Because once public opinion starts moving, it can become nearly impossible to slow down, especially when powerful names are involved. The film repeatedly returns to the idea of influence. Not influence in the traditional sense. Not social media followers. Not television ratings. Something deeper. Institutional influence. The type of influence that shapes conversations behind closed doors. The type of influence that determines which stories receive attention and which stories disappear. The type of influence that can protect reputations long after questions begin to emerge. According to commentators featured throughout the documentary, influence doesn't always operate through direct action. Sometimes it operates through silence. Sometimes it operates through proximity. Sometimes it operates through relationships. And sometimes the most important thing isn't what people say. It's what they choose not to say. That idea becomes increasingly important as the documentary examines how different worlds often overlap. Entertainment, business, politics, religion, media. At first glance, these industries seem completely separate. But when viewed from a distance, surprising connections begin to appear. The same names show up repeatedly. The same circles overlap. The same relationships continue resurfacing. And while none of that automatically proves wrongdoing, it does raise questions about how power functions at the highest levels. Questions that many people believe have gone unanswered for years. As the documentary continues, another theme starts emerging. Trust. Because every institution depends on it. Entertainment depends on trust. Media depends on trust. Religious organizations depend on trust. And when trust begins to crack, everything else becomes vulnerable. For many people, that's why these conversations feel so significant. This isn't simply about celebrity gossip. It's about confidence in institutions. It's about whether public figures live up to the standards they promote. It's about whether influence creates accountability or shields people from it. Those questions become even more complicated when allegations enter the picture. Because allegations alone don't establish facts. Courts exist for a reason. Evidence matters. Investigations matter. Due process matters. The documentary repeatedly acknowledges this reality. Yet it also recognizes another uncomfortable truth. Public opinion rarely waits for legal conclusions. In today's digital age, judgments often arrive before investigations. Narratives form before evidence is reviewed. And once those narratives take hold, they can become incredibly difficult to change, whether they're accurate or not. That's what makes the current moment so fascinating. Two different systems are operating at the same time. The legal system moves carefully. The public conversation moves instantly. One demands proof. The other often reacts to perception. And those two systems don't always arrive at the same destination. Meanwhile, the documentary explores how fear can shape behavior inside powerful circles. Not necessarily fear of guilt, not necessarily fear of innocence, but fear of exposure. Fear that private conversations could become public. Fear that old footage could resurface. Fear that hidden details could emerge unexpectedly. The mere possibility of exposure can change everything. Relationships shift. Strategies change. Public statements become carefully controlled. All because people are trying to prepare for what might happen next. Whether those fears are justified is often impossible to know, but their impact can still be enormous. Because fear doesn't require certainty to influence behavior. Possibility alone can be enough. As the story unfolds, viewers are left confronting a larger issue. Why do powerful networks seem so difficult to understand from the outside? Why do certain stories take years to emerge? Why do some allegations receive immediate attention while others remain hidden? And perhaps most importantly, who benefits when difficult questions remain unanswered? The documentary never claims to possess every answer. Instead, it focuses on the questions themselves. Questions about accountability. Questions about influence. Questions about responsibility. Questions about transparency. Questions about whether powerful institutions sometimes protect themselves before protecting the public. As legal proceedings involving Diddy continue to develop, those questions remain at the center of public debate. Supporters argue that everyone deserves fairness and due process. Critics argue that influence has historically delayed accountability. Both sides believe they are defending justice. And that's exactly what makes the situation so polarizing. Because people aren't only debating individuals, they're debating systems. They're debating power. They're debating trust. They're debating whether the institutions they once believed in still deserve that belief. By the final moments of the documentary, one thing becomes clear. This story isn't ending anytime soon. The headlines may change. New evidence may emerge. Additional interviews may surface. Legal developments may continue. But the larger conversation has already escaped the boundaries of a single case. It has become a discussion about modern power itself. Who controls narratives? Who influences public perception? Who decides which voices get heard? And what happens when those questions are directed at people who spent years operating at the highest levels of influence? Perhaps the most unsettling part is that the documentary never delivers a clean conclusion. There is no dramatic final revelation, no perfect resolution, no moment where every question suddenly receives an answer. Instead, viewers are left with uncertainty. And maybe that's the point, because real life rarely provides neat endings, especially when power, influence, reputation, and accountability collide. The truth often emerges slowly, piece by piece, sometimes over years, sometimes over decades. And until that process is complete, people are left navigating a landscape filled with competing narratives, conflicting opinions, and endless speculation. What remains undeniable, however, is that public trust is being tested. Not only trust in individuals, trust in institutions, trust in media, trust in leadership, trust in systems that millions of people depend upon every day. Whether these ongoing controversies ultimately lead to greater transparency or simply create more division remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the questions aren't going away, the scrutiny isn't disappearing, and the conversation is only getting louder. Because whenever power operates in the shadows, people eventually start looking for the light. And once those questions begin, they rarely stop until answers arrive.